The term we are about to explore is an ancient one, a combination of words that seems almost designed to provoke a reaction in our modern world: occult science. It is a phrase that carries with it the weight of centuries laden with connotations that can pull our minds in wildly different directions. For some, it conjures images of dusty tomes filled with arcane symbols of whispered incantations in dimly lit chambers, a relic of a pre-scientific age best left to the realm of fantasy and fiction. It can sound like a contradiction in terms juxtaposing the rigorous, evidence-based world of science with the murky, mysterious domain of the occult. This initial reaction, often one of skepticism or even outright dismissal, is completely understandable given the intellectual landscape of the 21st century, a time when we pride ourselves on clarity, reason, and empirical validation. Yet for others, this very same term, occult science, resonates with a profound and compelling allure. It whispers of a deeper reality, a layer of existence that lies just beyond the reach of our everyday senses and the instruments we have built to extend them. It hints at a form of knowledge that could satisfy a deep-seated longing within the human soul, a yearning to understand the fundamental questions of our existence that conventional methods sometimes fail to address. This group feels an intuitive pull towards the idea that there is more to the cosmos than what is immediately apparent, more than what can be measured in a laboratory or calculated in an equation. They sense that the universe holds secrets not of the conspiratorial kind, but of a profound and beautiful nature, waiting to be unveiled through a different kind of seeing, a different kind of knowing. Between these two opposing poles of perception, outright rejection and eager acceptance, lies a vast and varied landscape of intermediate opinions. There are those who might conditionally accept certain aspects while dismissing others, intrigued by the possibility of hidden knowledge, but wary of the potential for self-deception and superstition. They might be willing to entertain the idea of untapped human potential or subtle energies, yet draw a firm line at anything that sounds like magic or mysticism. These nuanced perspectives reflect the complex relationship our society has with the unknown. We are a species driven by curiosity, forever pushing the boundaries of what we know, yet we are also cautious creatures, taught by experience to be wary of claims that lack solid, demonstrable proof. The term occult science forces us to confront this internal tension directly. It is precisely because of this wide spectrum of reactions that we must approach the subject with great care and precision. The goal is not to persuade the skeptic through rhetoric or to blindly affirm the beliefs of the devotee. Instead, the intention is to embark on a journey of clarification, to strip away the layers of prejudice and misunderstanding that have accumulated around this term over millennia. We will examine what is actually meant when occult science is used in the context of a systematic, disciplined inquiry into the non-physical dimensions of reality. By doing so, we aim to establish a common ground for discussion, a space where we can explore the concept on its own merits, free from the emotional baggage and preconceived notions that so often cloud our judgment and prevent genuine understanding from taking root. The most common reaction from a modern, scientifically minded individual upon hearing the phrase occult science is often one of intellectual recoil. The term itself can seem offensive to the very spirit of scientific inquiry. Science, as we generally understand it, is built upon the pillars of transparency, repeatability, and objective observation of the material world. It is a public enterprise where data is shared, theories are rigorously tested, and conclusions are subject to peer review. The word occult, meaning hidden or secret, appears to stand in direct opposition to these core principles. The immediate assumption is that any system of thought describing itself in this way must be based on nothing more than fanciful daydreams, arbitrary assertions, and a desire to resurrect old superstitions that humanity has thankfully outgrown through the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution. On the other side of the spectrum, we find a very different kind of reception, one rooted in a deep sense of inner need. For a significant number of people, the term occult science is not a repellent but a magnet. It speaks to a hunger for knowledge that transcends the purely physical, a desire to connect with a source of meaning and understanding that they feel is missing from the mainstream narrative of a purely material universe. This yearning can stem from a variety of sources: a profound curiosity about the nature of consciousness, a search for answers to the great existential questions of life and death, or an intuitive feeling that there are unseen forces and dimensions at play in the cosmos. For these individuals, The term promises a path to something sacred, a way to explore the deepest mysteries of the soul and its place in the grand scheme of things. The term also, undeniably, attracts those with a less refined, though no less powerful, form of curiosity. For some, occult has a magical ring to it, suggesting a shortcut to power or forbidden knowledge. It feeds a craving for information about things that are beyond our ken, not for the sake of profound understanding, but for the thrill of accessing something mysterious, secret, or exclusive. This perspective can sometimes lead to a strange contradiction. There are people who, when confronted with the deepest questions of existence, actively prefer vagueness and confusion over clarity. They hold a conviction that there must be an unknowable realm beyond the reach of our faculties, and they cherish this unknowability. They seek not a science of the unseen, but a confirmation that some things are and should remain forever shrouded in mist. It is crucial for anyone speaking of occult science to be acutely aware of these varied interpretations and the potential for misunderstanding they create. The champions of perpetual mystery, who in reality desire the opposite of a true science, can inadvertently cast a long shadow of doubt over any legitimate inquiry. Their desire for the vague and the unknowable can be mistaken for the very essence of the pursuit, leading critics to dismiss the entire field as a haven for unclear thinking and unsubstantiated belief. Therefore, our exploration is addressed specifically to those readers who are willing to suspend their initial prejudices, whether positive or negative, and to examine the subject with an open and discerning mind, allowing the concepts to be judged on the clarity and coherence of their presentation, rather than on the loaded connotations of a single ancient term. A central point of confusion that must be addressed from the outset is the idea of secrecy. The word occult literally means hidden, which has led to the widespread belief that occult science is a body of secret knowledge, deliberately withheld from the general public and accessible only to a select, initiated few. This perception paints a picture of an exclusive club where secrets are passed down through special favor or fortunate discovery, creating an aura of elitism that is justifiably off-putting to the democratic spirit of modern knowledge. If a truth is universal, why would it be kept secret? This line of questioning is entirely valid, and any system that hoards knowledge for a privileged minority deserves the suspicion it attracts. However, this is a fundamental misinterpretation of the term as it will be used in our discourse. The contents of this book are not occult in the sense of being secret or intentionally concealed. There will be no mention of knowledge that is accessible only by special permission or exclusive initiation. To understand the intended meaning, we can turn to a beautiful concept articulated by the great poet and thinker Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. He spoke of the manifest secrets, offenbare Geheimnis, present in the phenomena of nature. What did he mean by this? He was pointing to the fact that the world around us is filled with wonders that are hidden in plain sight. They are not locked away in a vault. They are manifest or openly displayed for all to see. And yet, they remain secret to us as long as we observe them only with our physical senses and the ordinary intellect that is tied to those senses. The secret then lies not in the object of study but in our capacity to perceive it. A flower, for example, is a manifest object. We can see its color, smell its fragrance, and touch its petals. Science can dissect it, analyze its chemical composition, and map its genetic code. But the life force that animates it, the archetypal pattern it expresses, the subtle processes that guide its growth, these aspects remain secret or hidden to a purely sensory-based mode of observation. Occult science, therefore, is the study of that which remains unmanifest when we limit ourselves to the tools of ordinary perception. It is a science dedicated to developing the inner faculties that allow us to perceive these hidden or supersensible aspects of reality that are already there, openly waiting to be discovered. This reframing is essential. It shifts the focus from external secrecy to internal development. The knowledge is not hidden from you, rather your current faculties may be hiding it from you. The path to this knowledge is not about gaining admission to a secret society, but about undertaking a personal journey of self-education and the evolution of your own consciousness. The secret is not a piece of information to be whispered in your ear, but a new way of seeing that you must cultivate within yourself. It is, in this sense, the most democratic form of knowledge imaginable, because the potential to develop these latent faculties exists within every human being. The only prerequisite is the will to undertake the necessary inner work to awaken them. For anyone who defines science strictly as the study of what is manifest to the physical senses and the intellect that serves them, the very notion of occult science will naturally seem like a non-starter. From this perspective, which is perfectly legitimate within its own boundaries, what we propose to discuss cannot be considered a science at all. However, it is important for a person holding this view to recognize that this conclusion is not derived from a reasoned investigation into the nature of science itself. Instead, it often stems from an unexamined assumption, an ipse dixit, a dogmatic assertion based on personal feeling or habit, that science can only be applied to the material world. To see this more clearly, one must step back and reflect on how any field of study becomes a science in the first place. The quality of being scientific is not determined by the subject matter to which a method is applied, but rather by the mode of action of the human soul or mind while it is engaged in that inquiry. What is the specific inner attitude, the mental discipline, and the systematic approach that characterizes scientific endeavor? This is the crucial question. When we analyze this, we find that it involves qualities like rigorous logic, clear observation, systematic organization of data, and an unwavering commitment to truth. We have become accustomed to applying this mode of activity primarily to the data provided by our senses. Because of this long-standing habit, we can easily fall into the trap of thinking that the sense data itself is the essential factor, completely overlooking the more fundamental point, that a specific inner posture of the human mind is being applied to the revelations of the senses. The underlying idea of occult science is that this scientific attitude can be liberated from its self-imposed limitation to the sensory world. It proposes that the same integrity of thought, the same methodical rigor, and the same spirit of research can be maintained and applied to realms beyond the physical. The quest is to take the mental and spiritual faculties that have been so powerfully educated and disciplined through our work on understanding the natural world and to turn them towards the investigation of non-sensible realities. It does not seek to speak about sense phenomena directly, but to speak of the supersensible world in the same sober, careful, and systematic spirit that a natural scientist uses to speak of the physical world. It preserves the essential element that makes any knowledge a science: the inner disposition of the seeker. Therefore, far from being an antagonist to conventional science, occult science sees itself as its natural and necessary extension. It deeply values the achievements of natural science, not just for the information it provides about the world, but for the invaluable training it provides for the human mind. The occult scientist understands that without the integrity of thought and the mental discipline forged in the crucible of natural scientific work, any attempt to explore higher realms would devolve into fantasy and chaos. The quest, then, is to build upon this firm foundation. It is to take the strength, clarity, and discipline gained from studying the manifest world, and with that cultivated power, to consciously and methodically venture into the exploration of the manifest secrets that lie hidden within and beyond it. All genuine occult science, as we will explore it, must spring from two fundamental thoughts. These are not arbitrary beliefs or articles of faith that one must accept without question. Instead, they are presented as experiential facts, ideas that can take root in any human being and be verified through direct experience, provided one uses the appropriate means of investigation. For the occult scientist, these thoughts are the starting point of a journey into a deeper reality. It is fully acknowledged, however, that for many people today, these foundational concepts may seem highly questionable, perhaps even nonsensical or easily disproven by our current understanding of the world. The purpose here is not to demand belief, but to clearly state the premises upon which this entire field of inquiry is built, inviting you to consider them with an open mind. The first of these two thoughts is this: that behind the visible world we perceive with our senses, there exists an invisible world. This other world is, to begin with, hidden from our ordinary sensory perception, and from the kind of thinking that is exclusively tied to processing sensory information. It is not a separate, distant reality in some other location, but an interwoven dimension of existence, a deeper layer of the very world we inhabit. It is the invisible source from which the visible world arises, the blueprint that underlies the physical structure, the consciousness that animates the form. This idea suggests that the material universe, in all its complexity and wonder, is not the complete picture, but rather the manifest expression of a vast, unseen spiritual reality. The The second foundational thought logically follows from the first, and it concerns our own human potential. It posits that it is possible for any human being to penetrate into this hidden, invisible world. This is not achieved through some supernatural gift or by chance, but through the due development of faculties that are currently slumbering within each of us. Just as we are born with the potential to develop our muscles through exercise or our intellect through education, we are also endowed with latent spiritual senses or organs of perception. These higher faculties, when consciously cultivated and trained, can awaken and allow us to directly perceive and interact with the supersensible reality that was previously hidden from us. This thought transforms us from passive observers into active participants in the great cosmic drama. These two ideas, taken together, form the bedrock of occult science. They propose that there is more to reality than meets the eye, and that we, as human beings, have the innate capacity to experience that more. This is a profound and empowering proposition. It suggests that the limits of our perception are not fixed, and that the boundaries of the known universe can be expanded, not just by building more powerful telescopes, but by developing more powerful inner instruments of cognition. It is a call to adventure, an invitation to embark on the ultimate journey of discovery, the discovery of the hidden cosmos, and the simultaneous discovery of our own hidden potential. It is from this dual premise that our entire investigation will proceed. The very first foundational thought, that a hidden world exists behind the visible one, immediately runs into a formidable wall of modern skepticism. One common and powerful counter-argument simply states, there is no such world. The universe that we can perceive with our senses, augmented by our scientific instruments, is the one and only reality. The riddles it presents, such as the origin of the universe, the nature of consciousness, or the fine-tuning of physical constants, are indeed profound. However, this view holds that the solutions to these riddles, however complex, will ultimately be found within the domain of the physical world itself. The proponents of this view maintain that it is a failure of imagination or a lack of patience to posit a hidden realm to explain what we do not yet understand. This perspective places its faith entirely in the future progress of sensory observation and the sciences built upon it. It argues that although humanity may currently be far from answering every question, the established scientific method is the only reliable path forward. To suggest an invisible world is seen as a regression, a return to the magical thinking of our ancestors, who populated the forests with spirits and the skies with gods, because they lacked the tools to find naturalistic explanations. From this standpoint, the claim of a hidden world is not just an unproven hypothesis, but an unnecessary one, a God of the gaps argument that will inevitably retreat as the frontiers of conventional science continue to expand. The universe is mysterious enough, they say, without needing to invent another, even more mysterious one behind it. However, the aspirant to occult science would gently counter this by saying that this viewpoint arises from a self-imposed limitation on the very act of questioning. It is true that if you only ask questions that can be answered by physical data, you will only ever get answers that pertain to the physical world. But what if the visible facts themselves, by their very nature, point beyond themselves? What if the patterns, the synchronicities, the very existence of subjective consciousness are phenomena that inherently indicate a source that is not contained within the system they describe? The person who does not see this is often one who, consciously or unconsciously, has decided not to look at certain facts or to entertain certain types of questions because they do not fit the established paradigm. The occult scientist does not deny the validity or power of physical science. They celebrate it. They simply claim that for them and for many others, further questions arise naturally and spontaneously from an unbiased contemplation of the world. These are not questions born of ignorance, but of deeper insight into the limitations of a purely materialistic explanation. Why should it be considered unscientific to acknowledge these questions? Science cannot be put into a straitjacket by forbidding human beings from asking whatever questions their souls are compelled to ask. The quest for occult science begins precisely when one recognizes that the manifest world, in its very manifestation, is constantly whispering clues about its own hidden origins. Another significant objection comes not from those who deny the existence of a hidden world, but from those who deny our ability to ever know it. This viewpoint, often called agnosticism, takes a different, perhaps more humble-seeming approach. It says, yes, it is possible that there is a hidden world behind the visible one, but our human faculties of knowledge are fundamentally incapable of reaching it. We are, according to this view, bound by insurmountable limitations. Our minds evolved to help us survive in the physical world, to find food and avoid predators, not to comprehend the ultimate nature of reality. To attempt to do so is to stray beyond our cognitive jurisdiction. This hidden world, if it exists, should be left to the realm of religious faith, a matter of belief and reverence, not of direct, verifiable knowledge. This argument is compelling because it seems to acknowledge both the spiritual impulse and the rigor of science. It appears to offer a respectful compromise. Let science have the knowable physical world, and let faith have the unknowable spiritual one. Genuine science based on ascertainable facts can and should have no dealings with such a realm. Any attempt to cross this boundary is seen as an act of intellectual hubris. This perspective suggests we should accept our limits with grace and find peace in the mystery, rather than trying to conquer it with the tools of cognition. It is a powerful and widely held position that feels both intellectually responsible and spiritually respectful, setting up a seemingly permanent and impenetrable barrier between the human mind and the supersensible world. The response from the perspective of occult science is both simple and profound. It grants the premise of the argument entirely. With the mode of knowledge that the objectors have in mind, man will indeed never penetrate into an unseen world. If one considers the ordinary, sense-bound intellect to be the only possible mode of human cognition, then the conclusion that we are limited is inescapable. If the only tool you believe you have is a hammer, then you will correctly conclude that you cannot turn a screw. The entire argument rests on the assumption that our current cognitive toolkit is the only one we can ever possess. From this fixed standpoint, any discussion of a supersensible world is rightly deemed meaningless. However, the crucial question that this viewpoint fails to ask is, what if it is possible to evolve another mode of cognition? What if the human being is not a finished product but a transitional being, capable of developing new faculties of perception, just as we once evolved sight and hearing? If such a mode of knowledge can be cultivated, then it may very well lead into the supersensible world. To rule out this possibility from the start is not an act of intellectual humility, but an unproven assertion. The only unbiased reason for holding such an opinion is that the one who holds it is unacquainted with any other form of knowledge. No one can logically judge a thing which, by their own admission, they declare to be unknown to them. Sound thinking must admit that a person should speak of what they know, and refrain from making pronouncements on what they do not. A third line of objection often comes from a place of deep religious or spiritual conviction. This viewpoint sees the desire to penetrate the hidden world with our own cognitive faculties as an act of presumption, even a form of spiritual arrogance. It argues that the supersensible realm is the domain of the divine, a sacred space that weak and fallible humanity should not attempt to enter through its own efforts. This world, they feel, should belong to the life of faith and reverence alone. To want to know it in a scientific sense is to profane it, to reduce the sublime to the level of human intellect. From this perspective, our role is not to actively investigate, but to passively receive grace and revelation, to content ourselves with faith rather than striving for direct knowledge. To those who feel it is presumption for humanity to seek entry into the supersensible, the occult scientist poses a gentle but challenging question. What truly is the nature of a human being, and what are our inherent capabilities? If we are endowed with latent faculties, with the potential to evolve our consciousness to perceive higher realities, is it not a betrayal of the very source that granted us these faculties to let them lie dormant and undeveloped? Is it not a greater form of presumption to assume that we know the limits of the potential that has been gifted to us? Perhaps the true act of reverence is not to turn away from the hidden world in feigned humility, but to undertake the difficult work of self-development required to become worthy of perceiving it. True humility may lie in making the effort to use and perfect every tool we have been given. Then there is the argument that any knowledge of the supersensible world can only ever be a matter of personal opinion, lacking the universal validity of physical science. It is often pointed out that in the material world there is common ground for all. We can all agree that a rock is hard or that water is wet. But when it comes to the non-sensible, it seems to be a chaotic marketplace of conflicting personal visions and subjective beliefs. How can one claim any objective or universally valid certainty in such a domain? This viewpoint concludes that it is fallacious to speak of a science of the occult, as it can never achieve the consensus and objectivity that are the hallmarks of true scientific knowledge. This is a valid observation of the current state of affairs, but it mistakes a symptom for the cause. The occult scientist would respond that the vast diversity of opinion exists only so long as people try to approach the highest truths through arbitrary, undisciplined, or purely personal means. The very purpose of a science of the occult is to outline a methodical, reliable pathway that, when followed with rigor and integrity, leads to consistent and verifiable experiences. It is quite true that each individual must gain insight through their own inner effort. However, it is equally true that all those who undertake this journey and follow the disciplined path far enough do not arrive at divergent, contradictory views. Instead, they come to a perception of the same fundamental spiritual realities, just as trained scientists in different labs, using the same methods, arrive at the same results. The goal is to replace personal opinion with shared, verifiable insight. A scientist working in a laboratory makes use of instruments. They might use a microscope to see the very small or a telescope to see the very distant. These instruments are not found ready-made in nature. They must be carefully prepared. The scientist takes raw materials, glass, metal, silicon, and through a process of intelligent work, transforms them into precision tools capable of revealing what was previously invisible. This process of preparing the instrument is a prerequisite for the research. Without the finely ground lens or the sensitive electronic sensor, the research could not even begin. The quality of the discoveries is directly dependent on the quality of the instruments used to make them. This principle is universally understood and accepted in every field of conventional science. The supersensible form of knowing, or occult science, also makes use of an instrument. The crucial difference is that in this case, the instrument is the human being itself. Here, too, the instrument must first be prepared for the higher purpose of research into a non-physical realm. The faculties and forces with which the human soul and spirit have been endowed by nature in their ordinary, undeveloped state are like the raw, unrefined materials of glass and metal. They are not yet capable of the fine-tuned perception required for this work. These natural faculties, our thinking, our feeling, our will, must be consciously and methodically transformed into higher, more sensitive, and more powerful organs of spiritual perception. Thus, the occult scientist is one who learns to make of themselves the very instrument of their research. This process of self-transformation is the core methodology of occult science. It is the laboratory work of the spiritual investigator. The exercises and disciplines described in this path are not arbitrary rules, but are analogous to the principles of optics and engineering used to build a telescope. They are systematic procedures for refining our thinking until it becomes a faculty of clear-sighted intuition, for harmonizing our feeling life until it can perceive the moral and aesthetic qualities of the spiritual world, and for strengthening our will until it can act with conscious intention within that world. The preparation of the instrument and the research itself become one and the same activity. One does not first perfect oneself and then begin to see. Rather, it is in the very act of striving to see that one becomes perfected. Therefore, when a scientist enters into the spirit of this book, they will find no essential contradiction with their own scientific ethos. They will simply find the principles of rigorous preparation and methodical investigation applied to a new domain, the inner life of the investigator. The demand for clear evidence, logical consistency, and repeatable results remains. The difference is that the results are repeated not in an external apparatus, but within the consciousness of another investigator who undertakes the same path of inner development. The journey of occult science is the ultimate scientific endeavor, the transformation of the observer from a limited natural being into a conscious, self-aware instrument capable of exploring the deepest, most fundamental realities of the cosmos. When we contemplate the profound significance of natural science in human life, we quickly realize that its value extends far beyond the mere accumulation of detailed knowledge about the physical world. While the specific facts, figures, and formulas are undoubtedly important, they do not represent the ultimate prize of the scientific endeavor. In a way, the individual items of knowledge, the mass of an electron, the distance to a star, the sequence of a gene, can only lead to an experience of what the human soul is not. The soul does not find its living essence in the finished propositions and static facts presented in textbooks. Instead, the soul comes alive and experiences its own being within the dynamic process of acquiring that scientific knowledge. It is in the act of inquiry, the struggle to understand, and the moment of insight that our inner life is truly enriched and expanded. The real treasure gained from engaging with natural science is an evolution of the self. As the soul diligently works upon the phenomena of nature, wrestling with its complexities and striving for clarity, it undergoes a profound self-education. It learns discipline, integrity of thought, patience, and the ability to distinguish between objective observation and subjective bias. This inner development, this fortification of our cognitive and moral faculties, is a living acquisition. It is something more than just information about the external world. It is a transformation of our internal world. The process of building our scientific understanding of nature is simultaneously a process of building ourselves, making our own consciousness more robust, more flexible, and more capable. It is precisely this gain in self-development that occult science seeks to harness and apply to realms that lie beyond the purely physical. The occultist, far from misjudging or dismissing natural science, values it even more deeply than the conventional scientist might. They recognize it not only as a source of knowledge about the material world, but as an indispensable training ground for the human soul. The occult scientist knows with certainty that they cannot hope to build a genuine science of the supersensible without first being imbued with the rigorous integrity of thought that is the hallmark of the best natural scientific thinking. It is the foundation upon which everything else must be built. Once this integrity has been truly gained, once the mind has been tempered in the forge of natural scientific inquiry, it can then, with the requisite inner strength, be maintained and applied to other nonsensible realms of being. The methods may change, the objects of study may differ, but the core attitude of the seeker remains the same. The goal is to take the disciplined, educated soul and guide it toward the perception of a deeper reality. Occult science, therefore, is not a departure from the scientific spirit, but an extension of it, carrying the light of clear, methodical inquiry from the world of the senses into the world of the spirit, using the very faculties that natural science so brilliantly helped to forge. At this point, a significant and understandable hesitation can arise. In the contemplation of nature, the soul is guided and anchored by the object of its study in a very tangible way. The rock, the plant, the star, they are all there, providing constant feedback, resisting incorrect interpretations, and holding the researcher to a standard of empirical reality. The purely inner incentive, the self-discipline required to maintain the essence of the scientific way of thought, must therefore be far, far stronger when we venture into the contemplation of non-sensible worlds. In the supersensible realm, there are no physical objects to hold on to, no external data points to correct our course if we begin to stray into fantasy or self-deception. Many people, often without consciously realizing it, imagine that the scientific mind can only be maintained by holding tightly to the leading strings of natural phenomena. They believe that the moment these external guides are relinquished, the scientific endeavor of the mind and soul will inevitably lose its footing and begin groping helplessly in the dark. This leads them to decide, often with an air of absolute authority, that any and all exploration beyond the sense perceptible is doomed to be unscientific. Such individuals, however, have typically never faced the fundamental question of what constitutes the of scientific procedure. They mistake the training wheels, the sensory objects, for the act of riding the bicycle itself, which is the inner balance and disciplined thought. This judgment is often based on observing the inevitable aberrations that occur when scientific thinking has not been adequately strengthened through the rigorous study of nature. When a soul that lacks this foundational discipline sets out to contemplate the non-sensible or supersensible domains, the results are often chaotic and unreliable. Needless to say, a great deal of unscientific and fantastical talk concerning these higher worlds arises in this way, filled with vague assertions, personal whims, and logical contradictions. This unfortunate reality provides ample ammunition for critics who wish to discredit the entire field of inquiry. The reason for these failures, however, is not that the subject matter must, by its very nature, lie outside the pale of science. The problem is not with the territory, but with the explorer. The failure occurs because, in the given instance, there has not been adequate self-discipline and mental fortitude developed through the scientific study of the manifest world. It is like an untrained musician attempting to play a complex symphony. The resulting noise is not a judgment on the symphony itself, but on the lack of preparation of the player. True occult science acknowledges this danger and insists on the foundational training in clear, objective thinking as a non-negotiable prerequisite for the journey. With due regard for the dangers of undisciplined exploration, those who would speak of occult science must maintain a watchful and critical eye for all the vagaries that arise when the manifest secrets of the world are treated in an unscientific spirit. It would be a fruitless exercise, however, to begin our exposition by meticulously cataloging and refuting every one of these aberrations. For those whose minds are already prejudiced, the sheer number of these errors serves only to confirm their biases. The existence of countless charlatans and deluded dreamers, and they are indeed numerous, is taken as definitive proof that the entire effort is fallacious from the ground up, that the entire domain is corrupt. Yet, this reliance on the errors of others is often a pretext, a convenient justification for a pre-existing decision. As a rule, the rejection of occult science by scientists or scientifically minded critics is due in the last resort to the previously mentioned decision, the dogmatic assertion that science can only apply to the sensory world. The pointing out of aberrations is a secondary line of defense, however unconscious it may be. Therefore, engaging in a lengthy initial argument with such opponents is unlikely to be very fruitful. After all, they can observe with perfect justice that just because we see how others have fallen into error, there is no guarantee that we ourselves are standing on the requisite firm ground. The claimant to occult science can therefore do no other than to simply bring forward what they have to say, clearly and methodically. The ultimate judgment of whether the claims are right can only be made by others. Specifically, it can only be judged by those others who are willing to refrain from dogmatic pronouncements and are prepared to enter with an open mind into the tenor and substance of the communications about the manifest secrets of the world. It is then incumbent upon the spiritual investigator to show how the knowledge they bring forward relates to the existing achievements of human life and conventional knowledge. They must be prepared to meet possible objections and to point out where the external sense-perceptible realities of life confirm their statements. Crucially, the exponent of occult science should never rely on the arts of persuasion or emotional eloquence to make their case. The power of the communication must reside entirely within the pure content of the descriptions themselves. The style of the narration should not be driven by personal idiosyncrasies, but by the purely scientific spirit, a spirit trained and developed through the discipline of natural science. The goal is not to convince through rhetoric, but to illuminate through clarity, presenting the findings of supersensible research with the same sober, objective, and verifiable spirit that one would expect from any other scientific field, allowing the truth of the content to stand on its own merits. One of the most frequent objections leveled against works on occult science is that they do not what they adduce, they simply make bold statements and declare, "This is what occult science teaches." It would be a profound misunderstanding to think that anything put forward in these pages is intended in this authoritarian spirit. Our purpose is entirely different. It is to encourage the faculties that are developed in the human soul through the study of natural science to continue evolving, to press forward using their own inherent power. We then point out that through this continued, disciplined evolution, the soul will inevitably encounter the supersensible realities that are being described. The fundamental premise is that every reader who is able and willing to adopt this inner course is bound to meet with these realities for themselves. Here, we must highlight an important difference that arises the moment we enter the spiritual scientific realm, as compared with natural scientific study. In natural science, the facts lie spread out before us, accessible within the sense-perceptible world. The scientist who describes them rightly regards their own activity of mind and soul as something that recedes into the background, deferring to the given sequence and relationship of the objective facts. The spiritual scientist, on the other hand, cannot but put thee into the foreground. This is because the reader will only reach the facts when they, by appropriate methods, make this specific inner activity of the soul their own. The path and the destination are inextricably linked. In natural science, the facts, a fossil, a chemical reaction, a planet, are there for human perception even without the scientist's specific soul activity. They can be perceived, however little they might be understood. This is not so for the facts of spiritual science. These facts only enter the realm of human perception as a direct result of the soul's inner work. They are not passively observed but actively brought into consciousness through self-development. Thus, the exponent of spiritual science has to presume that the reader is not just a passive audience, but an active seeker, looking for the facts the writer. This shared journey determines the character of the descriptions, which become a narration of the discovery of the facts. Because of this unique dynamic, the very concept of proof undergoes a transformation. Anyone who really enters into the descriptions of occult science will presently perceive that in the process, they acquire ideas, concepts, and modes of thinking they did not have before. They begin to have quite unexpected thoughts concerning what they formerly imagined to be the essence of a proof. In natural scientific thinking, the activity that is applied to the proof is already inherent in the seeking for the facts. One cannot even find the facts without the path towards them carrying its own inherent validation. Anyone who really goes along this path will, in so doing, have the proof. No added proof from the outside can achieve anything more. Scientists rely on carefully crafted instruments, telescopes, microscopes to reveal hidden worlds. In occult science, the instrument is the human being. Just as glass and metal must be refined, so too must our thinking feeling, and will be consciously transformed. The spiritual investigator's task is to develop these faculties into tools for perceiving the supersensible. This is not abandoning scientific rigor, but intensifying it, refining our own consciousness as the most delicate instrument. The path of occult science is profound self-transformation, evolving our natural abilities to explore realities beyond the senses. The materialist insists only the sensory world exists, and science will eventually explain all mysteries within it. Occult science challenges this, noting that deep contemplation of the world raises questions that point beyond the physical. The intricate order of nature and the mystery of consciousness hint at deeper realities. Occult science doesn't reject scientific rigor. It extends inquiry to where physical explanations end. True science follows questions wherever they lead, even to worlds our senses cannot see. The agnostic claims, perhaps a hidden world exists, but human cognition can never reach it. Occult science agrees, ordinary intellect is limited, but asks, what if we can develop higher faculties? To declare the supersensible forever unknowable assumes our current state is our final potential. If new modes of perception are possible, so is new knowledge. Humility means admitting what we don't know, not closing the door on human evolution. Some believers see seeking spiritual knowledge as arrogance, arguing that the divine should be met with faith, not investigation. Occult science responds, if we're endowed with latent faculties by the divine, is it not our duty to develop them? True reverence may lie in cultivating these gifts, not letting them go unused. The path is not arrogant striving, but disciplined self-purification, becoming a vessel for spiritual truth. The goal is not to conquer, but to consciously participate in the spiritual world. The relativist argues, spiritual claims are just subjective opinions, lacking the consensus of science. Occult science admits chaos reigns when people follow undisciplined personal paths. The purpose of a rigorous method is to overcome subjectivity and reach shared insight. Those who follow a disciplined path arrive at consistent, verifiable spiritual truths, just as scientists do in the physical world. The goal is to elevate inquiry from personal opinion to universally valid knowledge. There are those who will have nothing to do with spiritual science because they perceive something fundamentally unhealthy in the entire enterprise. They look at the outward aspect of life, at the hard realities of the world: poverty, injustice, daily work, family responsibilities, and they see the pursuit of a hidden world as a form of escapism. They view it as a weakness, a turning away from the real and pressing duties of life in search of salvation in a world of mere dreams and fancies. From their perspective, which is grounded in a pragmatic and responsible engagement with the world, the spiritual seeker is a dreamer, an escapist who is failing to contribute to the tangible betterment of society. We must admit the partial justice of such objections, for they rest on a sound and healthy judgment, even if it is one that sees only a half-truth. If the striving for supersensible knowledge were to genuinely weaken a person's engagement with life, if it turned them away from reality and made them less capable of dealing with its challenges, then these objections would be strong enough to undermine the entire pursuit. Any spiritual path that results in morbidity, weakness, or a neglect of one's duties to the world is rightly to be condemned. The world has enough problems without adding a spiritual practice that makes people less effective at solving them. Here too, however, occult science would not take the right path by seeking to defend itself in the ordinary sense against such opinions. It would be fruitless to simply argue that it is not escapism. Instead, it can only try to express, in a way that is recognizable to any open mind, its own inherent value and nature. It must demonstrate, through its content and its effects, how it can actually enhance the strength and energy of life for those who devote themselves to it. The true quest for spiritual science will never make a person a dreamer or an escapist from the world. On the contrary, it will fortify them for the tasks of life in a way that nothing else can. It achieves this by connecting the individual to the deeper founts of life from which, as a being of soul and spirit, they themselves proceed. By understanding the spiritual laws that underlie earthly existence, one is better equipped to act effectively within it. By gaining insight into one's own destiny and purpose, one finds renewed strength and resilience in the face of adversity. Far from being an escape from reality, it is a plunge into a deeper, more fundamental reality, the source from which the physical world draws its very existence. The spiritual seeker returns to the world not weakened, but strengthened, not with less energy for life's tasks, but with an inexhaustible supply drawn from the very wellspring of life itself. Finally, we must address a practical hindrance that can bar the way for many people. It is true in principle that the reader will find in the expositions of occult science a description of soul experiences that can lead them toward the supersensible realities. In practice, however, this represents an ultimate ideal. To begin the journey, the reader must first receive, as simple communication, a wealth of supersensible discoveries which they cannot yet experience for themselves. This book, for instance, will describe what is known about the being of man, the journey through birth and death, and the evolution of the earth. It might then seem as though the author is simply putting forward a set of dogmas, asking the reader to accept them on blind faith or personal authority. But this is not the case. This is perhaps the most subtle point to grasp. In reality, whatever can be known of the supersensible world lives as a living content of soul within the spiritual investigator who expounds it. As the reader finds their way into this living content, as they think these thoughts and follow these descriptions with active inner participation, it kindles in their own soul the very impulses that lead toward the realities in question. The way we live in reading the descriptions of spiritual science is fundamentally different from how we read communications about sense-perceptible events. We simply read about the latter. But when we engage with communications of supersensible realities in the right way, we ourselves are entering a stream of spiritual life and being. To begin with, the reader will often fail to notice that this is so. Conditioned as we are far too apt to conceive of entry into the spiritual world on the analogy of sensory experience. Therefore, what we experience of this world while reading about it will seem to us like mere thoughts and nothing more. We will feel we are simply processing information. Yet, in the true receiving of it, even in the form of these living thoughts, a person is already standing within the spiritual world. All that remains is for them to become aware of the fact, to realize that they have been experiencing in all reality what they imagined they were only receiving as the mere communication of ideas. This true character of the experience will be made fully clear when one proceeds to the practical exercises for developing supersensible knowledge. As to the opinion that this information might influence the reader by way of suggestion or mere dogma, an open-minded engagement will show this to be quite unfounded. The contents of supersensible knowledge are experienced in a form of inner life that is so alert and self-aware that it excludes anything in the nature of suggestion. It leaves no other possibility than to impart the knowledge to one's fellow human beings in the same way any other truth is imparted, by appealing only to their wide-awake and thoughtful judgment, inviting them not to believe, but to begin the process of knowing. The path to occult science can be found in due time by every human being who perceives or even just divines the presence of a hidden aspect within the manifest world. When you become aware that your own powers of knowledge are not static but are capable of evolution, you will begin to feel an inner conviction that what is now hidden can one day become manifest to you. Once you are led to this threshold by such experiences of the soul, occult science opens up a profound prospect. It offers not only the discovery of answers to questions prompted by your thirst for knowledge, but also the further prospect that you yourself will be able to outgrow whatever may be hindering or weakening your life. This is a crucial point, for the denial of the supersensible is not merely an intellectual position. It has deep existential consequences for the human soul. In a higher and very real sense, it signifies an enfeeblement of life, a kind of inner death, when a person feels compelled to turn away from the supersensible or to deny its existence entirely. This turning away can lead one to a state of quiet despair, a hopelessness that settles in when the belief that the hidden can ever be made manifest is lost. This death and this despair are not abstract concepts. They are powerful inner opponents that actively work against our striving for spiritual knowledge. They manifest in countless forms, as cynicism, as apathy, as a sense of meaninglessness, or as a frantic immersion in superficial distractions. These states make themselves felt most keenly when our own inner strength begins to wane, when the vital forces of the soul start to diminish. When a person reaches this point, any strength they have for life must be brought to them from the outside, from external stimuli. They perceive the objects and events that confront their outer senses. They analyze and dissect them with their intellect. These outer things give them joy or pain. They impel them to such actions as lie within their immediate scope. For a while, a person may go on in this way, functioning in the world, building a career, raising a family, and pursuing hobbies. Sooner or later, however, a point of exhaustion is inevitably reached. Sooner or later, the nourishment that the outer world alone can provide becomes depleted. The soul begins to starve. This is not a mere assertion based on any one person's subjective experience. It is a conclusion derived from an open-minded and compassionate contemplation of all human life. We see this pattern play out again and again. It is the hidden world, the spiritual reality latent in the depths of all things, which ultimately preserves us from this exhaustion. It is the wellspring from which we can draw ever new strength for life. When the innate human power of fathoming these depths begins to wane, when we lose our connection to this inner source, the outer aspect of the world, too, will in the end cease to sustain us. The colors of life fade and the soul begins to die an inner death long before the body does. The consequences of this inner dying do not only concern the individual's personal well-being or their private sense of happiness or sorrow. More than any other pursuit, the study of true occult science gives us the ever-growing and profound certainty that, from a higher point of view, the weal and woe of each individual is inextricably bound up with the health and progress of all the world. This is not a sentimental platitude, but a fundamental law of spiritual reality. We are not isolated monads living out our lives in a vacuum. We are integral parts of a vast cosmic organism, and the state of our inner life has repercussions that extend far beyond our personal sphere. This is a path of knowledge whereby a human being reaches the sober insight that they do harm to the whole world if they fail in the right development of their own powers. When a person allows their life to become waste and void by severing their connection with the supersensible, they are not only destroying something within themselves, a process of inner decay that may ultimately lead them to despair. By their own weakness, by their own failure to live up to their potential, they become an active hindrance to the evolution of the entire world in which they live. Imagine, just for a moment, a single cell in a body that refuses to perform its function, that closes itself off from the life of the whole. It not only withers and dies itself, but it also becomes a burden, a point of sickness, for the entire organism. In the same way, a human soul that fails to cultivate its spiritual faculties becomes a point of inertia, a drag on the forward momentum of cosmic evolution. This understanding imparts a deep sense of responsibility. Our inner work is not a selfish pursuit. The development of our latent spiritual capacities is not just for our own enlightenment or salvation. It is a service we owe to the cosmos. Every step we take toward making the hidden manifest within our own consciousness sends ripples of light and strength throughout the entire spiritual ecosystem. Conversely, every time we choose cynical despair or materialistic numbness, we contribute to the forces of darkness and decay that hold back the progress of humanity and the world. The choice to seek the hidden is therefore not just a personal preference, but a moral imperative. This insight provides a powerful antidote to any feelings of insignificance or meaninglessness. In the grand scheme of things, your inner life matters profoundly. Your struggle to overcome doubt, your effort to think clearly about spiritual matters, your aspiration to perceive the hidden reality, all of it contributes to the great work of cosmic becoming. You are not a passive spectator in the universe, you are an active co-creator. By choosing to develop the part of the cosmos that has been entrusted to you, namely yourself, you are contributing in the most direct and potent way possible to the healing and evolution of all that is. Neglecting this duty is to harm not only oneself but the whole. Now, it is entirely possible for a human being to deceive themselves about this profound need for the hidden. A person can consciously give themselves up to the belief that there is no hidden side to things at all. They can construct a philosophy, supported by apparently logical arguments, which asserts that the world which meets their outer senses and their intellect is the all-inclusive total reality. They can live their life on the basis of this belief, making decisions, forming relationships, and finding a certain kind of satisfaction within this purely materialistic framework. This is a powerful delusion, and it can be maintained with great conviction, but only on one condition. It can only exist on the surface of consciousness. This self-deception, however convincing it may seem to the intellect, does not penetrate to the deeper layers of the human soul. Our feeling life, our will, our innermost aspirations and desires. These parts of our being do not partake in the illusory belief system constructed by the surface mind. In one way or another, whether we acknowledge it or not, they will always crave for the hidden side of existence. They yearn for meaning, for purpose, for connection to something larger than the finite self. When this connection is consciously denied, when the hidden world is taken from them, these deeper soul forces become starved and frustrated. They then drive the human being into states of inner turmoil. This inner conflict manifests as doubt, bewilderment, anxiety, and, as we have seen, even despair. A person may have everything the material world can offer: success, wealth, pleasure, and yet feel a profound and gnawing emptiness, a sense of being fundamentally lost. This is the cry of the deeper self, the soul's protest against the starvation diet of pure materialism. It is the feeling life and the will rebelling against the narrow prison built by the surface intellect. This inner contradiction can create immense suffering, a state of being at war with oneself, without ever consciously understanding the true source of the conflict. The surface mind insists everything is fine, while the depths of the soul are in agony. A way of knowledge that brings the hidden to revelation is therefore uniquely equipped to heal this fundamental split in the human psyche. It is apt to overcome all hopelessness, perplexity, and despair, because it speaks directly to the needs of the deeper self. It provides the very nourishment that our feeling and will have been craving. By making the hidden world manifest, it validates the deepest intuitions of the soul and realigns the surface consciousness with the truths residing in the depths. This process overcomes the inner division that weakens human life on Earth and incapacitates it from contributing its proper service to the cosmic whole. It makes a person whole again. One of the fairest and most practical fruits that grows from the pursuit of spiritual science is that it lends tangible strength and unshakable firmness to life. Its purpose is not merely to satisfy a person's abstract craving for knowledge or to provide interesting theories about the cosmos. Its ultimate gift is far more vital. It connects the individual to an inexhaustible fountainhead from which they can constantly draw, giving them renewed strength for their work, renewed courage for their challenges, and renewed confidence in their life's journey. This is not a one-time effect. It is a living source. No person who has once truly found their way to this inner source will ever go away unstrengthened, however often they may have recourse to it in times of need. This stands in stark contrast to the life lived only from the outside in. As we have seen, the outer world, with its finite stimuli and fleeting pleasures, eventually becomes exhausted. It can no longer provide the motivation and vitality the soul requires. The person who relies solely on external sources for their strength will inevitably find that their well runs dry. They become prone to burnout, cynicism, and a sense of futility. But the person who has learned to draw from the inner fountain of the hidden world has access to a supply of energy that is limitless, because it is connected to the very life of the cosmos itself. Their strength comes not from what they get from the world, but from what flows through them from a higher source. This inner strength manifests in very practical ways. It provides resilience in the face of failure, because one understands that setbacks are part of a larger, meaningful journey of learning. It provides patience in times of difficulty, because one perceives the slow, organic unfolding of spiritual processes. It provides courage to stand for what is right, even when it is difficult, because one's actions are aligned with a higher purpose. It brings a deep, quiet joy into life that is not dependent on external circumstances. This is not a fragile, conditional happiness, but a robust inner peace that can withstand the inevitable storms of earthly existence. This is why the pursuit of occult science is the ultimate antidote to the weakness and enfeeblement that can plague human life. It does not offer a temporary escape or a palliative comfort. Instead, it offers a radical cure by reconnecting the soul to its true source of power. It transforms a person from a fragile vessel, tossed about by the waves of external events, into a self-directed being, anchored in the eternal and capable of navigating life with purpose, strength, and an unwavering confidence. This is the profound, life-giving power that comes from making the hidden manifest. You might naturally imagine that the proper way to approach this subject would be to first describe the path in detail, to lay out all the exercises and methods, and only then to speak of the results and the worlds that are discovered. It would seem logical to first learn the how before exploring the what. However, experience shows that the reverse order is actually the more reliable and fruitful one. A person who, without first turning their attention to some of the essential facts, simply begins to do exercises with the abstract idea of gaining entrance there, is likely to find themselves adrift in a vague and confusing inner chaos. They lack a map, a conceptual framework to orient themselves. The human being finds their way into any new world to begin with, as it were, naively. We first learn to understand the essential features and landmarks of a territory through description. A student of biology first learns about the structure of a cell from diagrams and lectures, before they ever look through a microscope. This initial theoretical understanding provides the necessary context. It prepares the mind to recognize what it is seeing when it finally perceives it directly. In the same way, by studying the communications about the supersensible worlds, one is enabled to share in the knowledge in a conceptual or naive way. This forms the necessary foundation for the next stage. Then, having gained a clear idea of the landscape, one can leave this naive stage behind and begin the practical work of attaining in full consciousness the very experiences. The initial descriptions act as a guide, a set of signposts for the inner journey. When you begin the practical exercises, you are not wandering into an unknown wilderness. You have a map that helps you identify the inner experiences as they arise, to understand their significance, and to place them in their proper context. Anyone who really enters into occult science will become convinced that this two-step process, first the description, then the practice, is the only truly reliable way to supersensible knowledge. Therefore, the descriptions given in the first part of a work like this are not intended as dogmas to be believed. They are offered as a preliminary map of a territory you are being invited to explore for yourself. By studying these communications, you are not just passively receiving information, you are actively preparing your own soul for the journey. You are planting the seeds of the concepts that will later blossom into direct perception. This is the path from a naive but necessary reception of knowledge to the ultimate goal: independent, first-hand, conscious knowledge within the vast and wondrous hidden worlds. The pursuit of spiritual science, when rightly understood, offers a promise that extends far beyond the simple satisfaction of intellectual curiosity or the thirst for knowledge. While it does indeed provide answers to the deepest questions the human soul can ask, its ultimate gift is something far more vital and profound: the promise of transformation. The knowledge gained is not a collection of abstract facts to be stored in the memory, but a living force that works upon the very being of the one who receives it. It is a path that offers the prospect of outgrowing the weaknesses, the fears, and the limitations that hinder our lives. This transformative power is not a secondary benefit. It is the central purpose and the most beautiful fruit of the entire endeavor, strengthening the individual from the inside out. For many, life can feel like a constant struggle against inner opponents. We wrestle with feelings of inadequacy, with anxieties about the future, and with a sense of despair that can arise when life seems meaningless. These are not just fleeting moods. They are forces that can enfeeble the soul, leading to a kind of inner death where we lose our connection to the vital wellspring of existence. The denial of the supersensible world often exacerbates this condition. When we convince ourselves that the material world is all there is, we cut ourselves off from the very source of nourishment that our soul desperately needs. We may function for a time on external stimuli, but sooner or later, that well runs dry. and the soul begins to starve in a world stripped of its hidden depth. The knowledge offered by occult science acts as a direct antidote to this inner starvation. It is the living water for the thirsty soul. By revealing the hidden spiritual realities that underpin our existence, it restores a sense of profound meaning and purpose to life. It helps us to understand that we are not random accidents in a meaningless cosmos, but essential participants in a grand evolutionary drama. This understanding is not just a comforting thought. It is a source of immense strength. It allows us to see our personal struggles in a larger context, transforming them from pointless suffering into meaningful opportunities for growth and development. This shift in perspective is the beginning of a deep and lasting inner transformation. This is one of the fairest fruits of the pursuit. It lends an unshakable strength and firmness to life. It connects us to an inexhaustible fountainhead of vitality, allowing us to face life's challenges not with fear and weakness, but with courage and confidence. No person who has truly found their way to this inner source will ever go away unstrengthened, however often they may turn to it. This is the transformative power of occult science in action. It does not just inform the mind, it heals and fortifies the soul, enabling us to become stronger, more resilient, and more complete human beings, capable of living our lives with purpose and grace. The transformative power of occult science does not end with the individual. A deeper study of its principles reveals a profound and sobering truth. The well-being of each person is inextricably linked to the well-being of the entire world. This is not a mere sentimental ideal, but a fundamental law of the cosmos. We are not isolated beings living out our lives in a vacuum. We are integral cells in the vast living organism of the universe. Therefore, the inner work we do to strengthen ourselves is not a selfish act. It is a service we render to the whole, and conversely, neglecting our own development becomes a hindrance to the evolution of all of humanity and the world itself. When a person turns away from the supersensible and allows their inner life to become barren and weak, they do more than just harm themselves. Their personal weakness becomes a point of resistance, a drag on the forward progress of the cosmic whole. Imagine a symphony orchestra where one musician refuses to tune their instrument or learn their part. Their discordant notes not only ruin their own contribution, but also disrupt the harmony of the entire ensemble. In the same way, a human soul that fails to cultivate its spiritual potential becomes a source of disharmony in the spiritual world, a burden that must be carried by the collective. This understanding elevates the personal quest for knowledge into an act of cosmic responsibility. By engaging with occult science, we begin to realize that every step we take on the path of self-development sends ripples of strength and light throughout the entire web of existence. When we overcome a personal weakness, when we achieve a new level of clarity in our thinking, or when we cultivate a more compassionate heart, we are not just improving our own character. We are adding a measure of health and vitality to the entire spiritual atmosphere of the earth. Our inner victories become victories for the world. This imbues our personal struggles with a new and profound sense of meaning. We are not just working for ourselves, we are soldiers in the great battle for the evolution of consciousness. This symbiotic relationship flows in both directions. As we work to strengthen the world through our own development, the world in turn provides us with greater strength. By aligning ourselves with the progressive evolutionary forces of the cosmos, we find that those same forces flow back into us, supporting and sustaining our efforts. The individual and the world are engaged in a sacred partnership of mutual strengthening. The transformative power of occult science, therefore, is its ability to heal the illusion of separation and to place the individual in a conscious and responsible relationship with the cosmic whole, turning personal growth into a powerful engine for universal progress. There are those who view any engagement with a hidden world with deep suspicion, seeing it not as a source of strength but as a form of unhealthiness and weakness. From a pragmatic standpoint, they see the pressing realities of earthly life, the need to work, to care for others, to solve tangible problems, and they fear that the pursuit of spiritual science is a form of escapism. They picture the spiritual seeker as a dreamer, turning their back on their real-world duties to find solace in a world of fantasy. This objection is not entirely without merit. It rests on a sound, healthy judgment that values responsibility and active engagement with life. If this pursuit truly led to a neglect of reality, it would indeed be a path to be avoided. We must acknowledge the partial justice of this viewpoint. Any spiritual path that makes a person weaker, more morbid, or less capable of handling their life's responsibilities is rightly condemned. The world has enough challenges without encouraging people to retreat into a private world of dreams. The true quest for spiritual science, however, does not lead to this outcome. On the contrary, its aim is to make a person more capable, more resilient, and more engaged with life, not less. It does not offer an escape from reality, but a deeper plunge into it, by revealing the spiritual foundations upon which the physical world rests. It seeks to fortify the individual from those deeper founts of life from which they, as a being of soul and spirit, ultimately proceed. The charge of escapism arises from a misunderstanding of the path's true nature. It is not about turning away from the earth, but about bringing the wisdom of the heavens down to the earth. By understanding the spiritual laws that govern existence, one becomes more effective in their actions. By gaining insight into their own purpose and destiny, they find a renewed sense of motivation and a clearer direction for their earthly tasks. The knowledge gained from the supersensible world is not meant to be hoarded in an ivory tower. It is meant to be applied to inform our choices, to heal our relationships, and to inspire our work in the world. It makes us better parents, better colleagues, and better citizens. Therefore, the true spiritual investigator will never be a person who is detached from the world or disinterested in its affairs. Instead, they will be among the most practical and effective of people, because their actions are grounded in a deeper understanding of cause and effect. They are fortified against the burnout and cynicism that can come from dealing with life's difficulties, because they are connected to an inner source of strength and meaning. The transformative power of occult science is demonstrated not by how well one can describe ethereal realms, but by how much more courageously, lovingly, and effectively one can live their life right here, in the midst of worldly reality. A significant hurdle for many who approach occult science is the initial necessity of receiving information that they cannot yet verify for themselves. This book, for example, must describe the nature of the human being, the journey after death, and the evolution of the cosmos. It can easily seem as though the author is presenting unproven dogmas and demanding that the reader accept them on faith. This can feel, honestly, antithetical to the spirit of free inquiry. However, this perception stems from a misunderstanding of how these descriptions are meant to be received. Their purpose is not to command belief, but to kindle a specific kind of interactivity in the soul of the reader. The way we engage with a text on spiritual science is fundamentally different from how we read a newspaper article or a history book. When we read about sense-perceptible events, we're largely passive receivers of information. But when we read descriptions of supersensible realities in the right way, with active, focused, inner participation, we are doing something more. The thoughts and ideas presented are not just abstract concepts, they are living forces. As we immerse ourselves in them, thinking them through with clarity and feeling their inner coherence, we are actually beginning to enter into a stream of spiritual life and being. The description itself becomes the first step on the path to the experience. At first, the reader may not be aware of this process. Conditioned by our sensory experience, we are accustomed to thinking of experience as something that happens out there. So this interactivity of engaging with spiritual thoughts will likely feel like mere thinking. The reader might believe they are simply processing ideas. Yet, in the very act of truly receiving these thoughts, of bringing them to life within their own consciousness, the reader is already standing within the spiritual world. The only thing that remains is for them to become aware of this fact, to recognize that what they mistook for simple ideation was, in fact, a genuine, albeit subtle, spiritual experience. This is why the charge that these descriptions work through suggestion is unfounded. Suggestion works on a passive, unthinking mind. The process described here requires the opposite, a state of heightened, wide-awake, and thoughtful judgment. The content of supersensible knowledge is experienced in a form of inner life that is so clear and self-aware that it actively excludes the possibility of suggestion. The descriptions are not meant to be passively absorbed, but to be actively recreated within the reader's soul. This inner recreation is a transformative act. It is the process by which the communicated word begins to blossom into direct personal perception. One might logically assume that the correct way to learn about the supersensible would be to first master the practical exercises of the path, and only then to receive information about the worlds they reveal. In practice, however, this approach often leads to confusion. A person who begins doing inner exercises without any conceptual framework to guide them is like, honestly, an explorer entering a vast, unknown wilderness without a map. They may have powerful experiences, but they will be unable to orient themselves, to understand the significance of what they perceive, or to distinguish between subjective fantasy and objective reality. They risk becoming lost in a vague and chaotic inner world. The more reliable path is to begin, as it were, naively. We first find our way into any new domain by learning its essential features through description. A medical student first studies anatomical charts before dissecting a body. This preliminary conceptual knowledge is not the end goal, but it is an indispensable preparation. Similarly, by first studying the communications given about the supersensible world, the reader is able to share in the knowledge in a preparatory conceptual way. This naive stage is crucial because it builds the necessary framework in the mind, creating the signposts and landmarks that will be needed for the later journey of direct experience. Once the reader has absorbed this map of the territory, they are then prepared to move beyond the naive stage. They can begin the practical application of the procedures that lead to independent knowledge, but now they do so with a sense of direction. When inner experiences begin to arise, they are not met with confusion, but with recognition. The reader can say, "Ah, this corresponds to the state of consciousness that was described," or "This perception aligns with the laws of the spiritual world I have studied." The initial descriptions provide the context that transforms a chaotic flood of impressions into a coherent and understandable experience of a structured, ordered reality. This is the reliable and transformative path that occult science offers, from passive reception to active perception, from naive understanding to conscious, independent knowing. First, one studies the map. Then one undertakes the journey. Anyone who truly enters into this process will become convinced that this is the surest way to approach the supersensible. The initial descriptions are not dogmas to be believed, but guideposts to be used. They are the essential first step that enables the seeker to transform what begins as a communication of thoughts into what ultimately becomes their own direct, first-hand, and undeniable experience of the hidden worlds. We have journeyed through the complex and, honestly, often misunderstood landscape of occult science, addressing its character, its methods, and the myriad objections that stand as barriers to its reception. We've really tried to demystify the term, showing that it doesn't refer to some secret knowledge hoarded by a select few, but rather to a methodical investigation of the manifest secrets of existence, the supersensible realities that lie hidden behind the veil of our ordinary perception. This path of inquiry is not some relic of a superstitious past, but in fact a necessary and forward-looking extension of the scientific spirit. It applies the same rigor and integrity of thought cultivated by natural science to the deeper dimensions of the soul and the cosmos. At its core, it stands on two essential pillars: the existence of a hidden world and the innate human capacity to develop the faculties to perceive it. This journey of discovery is not reserved for mystics or for those born with special gifts. The potential to awaken these slumbering faculties lies dormant within every human being, just waiting to be cultivated through conscious effort and disciplined training. In its essence, the path is profoundly democratic. It doesn't demand blind faith or adherence to dogma, but rather an open mind, a courageous heart, and a willingness to undertake the inner work of self-transformation. It really is an invitation to become a scientist of your own inner world, to make of yourself the very instrument of research. The descriptions of the supersensible worlds are not presented as final truths to be passively accepted, but as a preliminary map offered to a fellow explorer, providing direction and context for a journey you must ultimately undertake for yourself. The transformative power of this journey extends far beyond the satisfaction of intellectual curiosity. To engage with occult science is to embark on a process of healing and strengthening. It addresses the deep human need for meaning, a need that a purely materialistic worldview can never fully satisfy. By connecting with the hidden wellsprings of life, we find an inexhaustible source of strength, resilience, and confidence that fortifies us for the challenges of earthly existence. It is the definitive antidote to the inner despair and enfeeblement that arise from a sense of meaninglessness, replacing weakness with a robust vitality and a firm sense of purpose that is grounded not in external circumstances, but in an unshakable inner knowing. So the conclusion of our exploration is, in fact, a beginning. It is an open invitation to any soul who feels the pull of these deeper questions, who senses that there is more to reality than meets the eye. The path of occult science is open, and its promise is profound, not only to know the world more completely, but to become more complete yourself. It is a call to move beyond the limitations of our current mode of perception and to consciously participate in the next stage of our own evolution. The choice to walk this path is a choice for a fuller, stronger, and more meaningful life. A life lived in conscious connection with the vast spiritual realities that support and pervade our world. A central theme that has emerged throughout our discussion is the power of occult science to heal the divisions that characterize modern life. It heals the division within the individual, bridging the gap between the surface intellect that may deny the supersensible and the deeper soul life that perpetually craves it. Furthermore, it heals the perceived division between the individual and the world, revealing the profound and inextricable connection that binds our personal destiny to the destiny of the cosmos. This is not a science of fragmentation, which analyzes the world by taking it apart, but a science of wholeness, which understands things by seeing their place within the larger, living tapestry of existence. It restores a sense of sacred responsibility to human life. This understanding of interconnectedness provides a powerful answer to the charge of escapism. The true spiritual investigator does not turn away from the world, but turns towards it with a newfound depth of understanding and a greater capacity for effective action. They come to realize that their own inner development is not a selfish pursuit, but a fundamental duty to the whole. Every step taken to purify one's thinking, to harmonize one's feelings, and to strengthen one's will is a contribution to the health of the entire spiritual ecosystem. By healing and strengthening the part of the cosmos that is oneself, one becomes a source of healing and strength for the world, a conscious agent of its progressive evolution. This reconnection between the individual and the cosmos fosters a unique kind of moral impulse. Morality is no longer a matter of following external rules or commandments, but arises organically from the direct perception of spiritual reality. When one can perceive the consequences of one's actions as they ripple through the spiritual world, harming or helping other beings, the choice to act with love and compassion becomes a simple matter of clear-sighted wisdom. We cease to do harm not because we are forbidden, but because we understand the intricate web of life and would not wish to damage its beautiful and delicate structure. This is the foundation of a truly free and intuitive morality, born from knowledge rather than from fear. Ultimately, occult science is a path that leads from isolation to communion. It takes the human being, who may feel like a small and insignificant fragment in a vast, indifferent universe, and reveals their true stature as an indispensable and beloved co-creator of cosmic reality. It shows that our inner lives matter profoundly, and that our strivings for truth, beauty, and goodness are not futile gestures, but are woven into the very fabric of the world's becoming. This science of wholeness transforms our entire experience of life, replacing anxiety and alienation with a deep sense of belonging, purpose, and active participation in the magnificent drama of cosmic existence. The path of occult science demands a particular kind of courage. It is not the physical courage of the warrior, but the inner courage to stand between the twin abysses of blind faith and cynical doubt. On one side lies the temptation of dogma to passively accept descriptions of the spiritual world without undertaking the arduous work of personal verification. This is the path of the follower, and it leads not to true knowledge, but to spiritual dependency. On the other side lies the temptation of perpetual doubt to use the lack of immediate physical proof to dismiss the entire endeavor, closing the door to higher knowledge before the journey has even begun. This is the path of the hardened skeptic, which leads to a barren inner landscape. The true spiritual scientist must navigate carefully between these two extremes. They must have the humility to receive initial communications with an open and trusting mind, recognizing them as necessary guides. At the same time, they must possess unshakable resolve to transform this received knowledge into their own direct, first-hand experience. This requires commitment to rigorous inner work, to practical exercises that cultivate higher faculties of perception. It is a path that honors both the wisdom of tradition and the fierce independence of the individual seeker, demanding that we become not believers, but knowers in our own right. This courage to know also involves facing the contents of one's own soul with unflinching honesty. The process of developing higher faculties is also a process of self-purification. It forces us to confront our own prejudices, our hidden fears, our selfish desires, and the comfortable illusions we have built around ourselves. The light of higher knowledge illuminates the dark corners of our own being, and the courage to look at what we find there, without turning away, is essential for progress. This path is not for those seeking easy comforts. but for those willing to be fundamentally transformed by the truth, even when challenging. In the end, this journey beyond dogma and doubt cultivates a new relationship with truth itself. Truth is no longer seen as static propositions, but as a living, dynamic reality that must be entered into and experienced. The proof of occult science is not found in logical argument or external experiment, but in the inner transformation of the knower. It is found in the dawning of a new kind of sight, in the enhanced strength and purpose it brings to life, and in the growing certainty that arises from direct conscious contact with the spiritual world. This is the ultimate reward for the courage to know not just a new set of beliefs, but a new way of being. Our exploration of occult science ultimately points toward the future. It suggests that humanity is not at the end of its evolutionary journey, but at the threshold of a momentous transition. Just as we once evolved the capacity for self-conscious thought, which distinguishes us from the animal kingdom, we are now poised to evolve the capacity for conscious perception of the spiritual world. The path described is not merely a personal hobby for a few interested individuals, it is a pioneering work that lays the foundation for a future, universal mode of human consciousness. The methods of occult science are the tools by which we can consciously and actively participate in this next great leap of our own evolution. This coming transformation of consciousness will have profound implications for every aspect of human life and civilization. A society in which a growing number of individuals can directly perceive spiritual realities would be fundamentally different from our own. Our sciences would be expanded to include the non-physical, our arts would draw inspiration from higher worlds, our systems of medicine would treat the whole human being, body, soul, and spirit, and our social and political structures would be reshaped by a deeper understanding of human nature and our shared spiritual destiny. The conflicts that arise from materialism, selfishness, and a limited view of our identity would gradually give way to a culture of cooperation, empathy, and reverence for all life. This is not a utopian fantasy, but a sober assessment of the potential that lies within the human spirit. The dawning of this new sight will be a gradual process, built one soul at a time. Every individual who undertakes the path of inner development, who awakens even a glimmer of these higher faculties, is a lamplighter for the future of humanity. They are creating the new organs of perception that will one day be the common inheritance of all. This gives our personal striving a tremendous and inspiring significance. We are not just working for ourselves, we are working in service of the future, helping to birth a new and more luminous consciousness for the world. Therefore, the final word on occult science is one of profound hope and boundless potential. It presents us with a vision of what the human being is destined to become, a being who can stand with their feet planted firmly on the earth while their consciousness freely and knowingly explores the vastness of the spiritual cosmos. It is a science of empowerment, a path of transformation, and a promise of a future in which the hidden becomes manifest, and humanity comes into its full inheritance as citizens of two worlds. The journey is arduous, the demands are great, but the destination is nothing less than the conscious realization of our own divine potential and the co-creation of a wiser, more compassionate world.